France has sent a chilling warning to Russia, and Russian investors are fleeing the Russian market. French President Emmanuel Macron just said that it should be Russia who should be paying for damages, and it should be Russia who should be paying back the US, the EU, and the UK for all the aid money they have spent in Ukraine, because it was Russia that started this war. It was Putin who launched this senseless invasion. Listen to it yourself.
I support the idea to have Ukraine first being compensated, because they are the ones who have lose a lot of their fellow citizens and being destroyed by these attacks. Second, all of those who paid for will be compensated, but not by Ukraine, by Russia, because they were the one to aggress.
Again, just so you understand, Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear.
Yeah.
We have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe, Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of a loan, because this is not our belonging. So they are frozen. If at the end of the day, in the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us, super. It will be loan at the end of the day, and Russia would have paid for that.
If you believe that, it's okay with me. But they get their money back, and we don't, and now we do. But, that's only fair.
Now, it wasn't just Macron who was handing out bad news at this press conference. Even Trump joined in and decided to deliver his own blows to Russia. First, he said that Ukraine should be able to take back some of the territories that Russia controls, and he really hopes that's the case. Now, this was definitely not good news for the Kremlin, because they had to put out a statement right away. So let's first listen to Trump's comment, and then we'll get to the Kremlin statement.
They take back what they don't impact you.
That's not an easy thing to do, is it? It's not easy. Asking whether or not you can take back the land that they lost. And I say that, yeah, perhaps some of it, yeah, I hope so. But that's not an easy thing to do.
But not everything.
It's going to be something we're talking about.
Will you come?
And all this time, Russia has been telling the world that the Ukrainian territory that Russia now controls is not Ukraine's anymore. It's Russian territory, part of the Russian Empire, and not on the table when it comes to negotiation. So, this statement from Trump was definitely a shock to Russian leaders, and the Kremlin had to issue a statement right away. Let's look at that statement. The goals of the special operation, despite the start of diplomatic efforts to settle the situation in Ukraine, have not been achieved, and the territories of the Russian Federation are not the subject of negotiations. First of all, Russia cannot decide what it wants to call this war. The Russian people and even the Russian media are calling it a war straight up, while Putin refuses to call it anything other than a special military operation. But now, Russian ambassadors at the UN are calling this special military operation just a Ukrainian project. Listen to this yourself. Statement.
The world eventually found itself on the brink of World War III because of the anti-Russian Ukraine project being implemented by Western countries in their geopolitical interests on our borders.
This is where the Polish foreign minister stepped up and told Russia to its face that what it was doing is wrong. What Russia is doing is not a Ukrainian project. It's not even a special military operation. It affects the lives of millions of Ukrainians and even millions of Russians. Because of the decision Putin made, Russians are suffering. Russians cannot afford food. Inflation in Russia is as high as 28%, but food inflation is as high as 50%. And for some items, it's as high as 94%. Imagine, in 6 months, the bare necessities that you need to eat go up almost double in price, while the salary you're making stays pretty much the same. This affects the poor Russians the most, the same communities that are suffering because Putin is taking all the men who can fight and throwing them as cannon fodder in Ukraine. And now they cannot even afford food because of Putin's spending and printing, which has caused inflation to spiral out of control. The Central Bank of Russia, the only saving grace of the Russian economy, is trying its best to control inflation and save the country's economy. Meanwhile, Putin, who is behind all this money printing, is blaming the central bank. But anyway, Let's listen to this clip from Poland's foreign minister putting Russia in its place.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've just heard another performance by the Russian ambassador consisting of lies, propaganda, and hypocrisy. He referred to Ukraine as a project. Ukraine is not a project. Ukraine is a country with a longer history than Russia. Ukraine is a member of this body for far longer than the Russian Federation. Ukraine has a history, language, and identity and aspirations all of its own, with borders confirmed several times in treaties by the Russian Federation. The mission of this body, from its foundation, has been to decolonize, not to
Statement. I love the way he speaks, and I love how upfront he is with Russia. Back when Ukraine entered Kiev, and Russia was freaking out, they were saying it's the Ukrainians who are escalating this war. It's the Ukrainians who want to start World War III. Even back then, Poland had a simple message for the Russians. If you want this war to stop, all you have to do is pull back your forces. And Poland was as clear as one can be. They said, Ukraine will pull out of Kiev if Russia pulls out of Ukraine. That's how you can end the war in 5 minutes. And it's all in the hands of Putin. So all the Russians who are suffering in KK, in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, Putin has no one to blame but himself. Let's listen to that message because it was very clear and it was very powerful. And it still holds true to this day.
Poland would suggest that President Putin makes a phone call to his chief of staff and tells him to get the hell out of Ukraine.
That's not going to happen.
But this war could be ended in 5 minutes by Russia. Unfortunately, Ukraine does not have this option because it's desperately defending its independence and, you might argue, even very existence. We need to stay the course in supporting the victim of aggression. There was a vote at the United Nations General Assembly, one of the most overwhelming votes in the history of the UN, to condemn the aggressor. This is not a press statement. It's law. And we have a duty as the international community to take countermeasures, to restore the respect for the internationally recognized border, the guarantees that the US, Britain, and above all, Russia gave to Ukraine in 1993 in return for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons. And also remember, Ukraine and Russia have a border treaty solemnly signed and ratified by Putin. So when you're saying they should negotiate, they have politics too, you know. And we should stay the course in helping Ukraine repel this aggression.
Now, coming back to the Trump press conference, Trump didn't just deliver the bad news to Russia on the point of Ukrainian territory. Trump also said that Ukraine will have a security guarantee from Europe, and that means the European peacekeeper troops will be in Ukraine, making sure Russia adheres to all the terms it agrees upon in the negotiations. And that's something Putin and Putin's puppet, Lavrov, have publicly said that Russia will never accept. But now, Trump goes a step further, saying that Putin has told him that he will accept those terms. That just shows how desperate Russia is for a ceasefire. And it also shows how unsustainable this war has become for the Russian economy. Even Putin is starting to realize this. Let's listen to Trump's comments. Trump.
Well, we're going to have a backing of some kind, and obviously the European countries are going to be involved, and I don't think you're going to need much backing. I think that's not going to be a problem. Once an agreement is signed, Russia's going to get back to its business, and Ukraine and Europe are going to get back to their business. I don't think it's going to be a problem.
Convince Vladimir Putin to accept the European troops as peacekeeper, would you think?
Yeah, he will accept.
He will accept
I've
it.
asked him that question.
You talked to him?
I've asked him that question.
He said yes?
Because he's not, look, if we do this deal, he's not looking for war. He doesn't mind, but I've specifically asked him that question. He has no problem.
What makes this situation even more funny, and just shows how desperate Russia is the fact that just a few days ago, when Russia was in Saudi Arabia, negotiating with the US delegation, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, said right after the negotiations that one red line Russia has is no European troops in Ukraine. And now, we have Trump himself confirming that Putin will accept the European troops. Let's listen to Lavrov's comments.
Let's listen to this Lavrov comment.
We explained to our colleagues today that President Putin has repeatedly stressed that the expansion of NATO, the absorption of Ukraine by the North Atlantic Alliance, is a direct threat to the interests of the Russian Federation to our sovereignty. We explained today that the appearance of armed forces from the same NATO countries, but under a false flag under the flag of the European Union, or under national flags, does not change anything in this regard.
This is where President Macron, it's a good thing that he visited, was able to remind Trump what Zelensky has been trying to remind Trump for a long time. Russia is not a country that sticks to the agreements it makes. Remember, Russia agreed to a ceasefire in 2014, and it just broke it a few months later. Russia has a habit of breaking its deals. Russia has a habit of breaking ceasefires. And that's why it's so important that we have a proper security guarantee in Ukraine to protect Ukrainian sovereignty. I'm not trying to oversell things when I say Russia has a habit of breaking agreements. In the past, there are 237 agreements, acts, memorandums, ceasefires, and international laws that Russia has violated. If we just scroll through all of them, it takes you a few seconds. That's how long the list is. So, when someone tells you who they are, believe them. Russia has shown us time and time again that, for them, a ceasefire is just a time to regroup, rearm, and come back again. The only thing Russia understands is strength. They don't understand peace. They don't understand mutual understanding. They understand strength. And if we want a long-lasting peace in Ukraine, we need to make sure that Ukraine is strong enough to push Russia back whenever it comes back. Here's President Macron explaining this exact thing. Macron: yes, but be careful because in 2014, we had a ceasefire with Russia. And I can tell you from experience, because I was in charge with Germany to follow up on the ceasefire, that it was violated every time by Russia. And we didn't react. I can tell you as well, by experience, because there was one meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky in history. One. It was in Paris in December 2019. And because there was a lack of credibility in our collective deterrence. Over the last few years, NATO's presence in the Baltic Sea has been a point of tension, especially after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The situation has escalated with mysterious damage to key undersea cables, vital for Europe's communication and energy systems. NATO has responded with increased military patrols, including a fleet called Baltic Sentry, to monitor the growing threat from Russia. Why are these undersea cables so important? These cables carry almost all online data, phone calls, and financial transactions across the globe. They're also crucial for Europe's electricity grid. NATO has recognized their importance and is ramping up efforts to protect them from sabotage, a tactic that Russia is accused of using through hybrid warfare. Russia's Shadow Fleet, including the ship Eagle S, is suspected of being involved in these operations, such as damaging undersea cables and gas pipelines. In late 2024, Finland and Estonia reported more damage to critical infrastructure. These attacks on undersea cables and power lines are a reminder of the vulnerabilities in modern communication systems. Even though the cables are thick and well protected, they can still be targeted, especially in a world where hybrid warfare tactics, like cyber attacks and physical sabotage, are common. Incidents like these are part of a wider strategy from Russia to undermine NATO's efforts, especially after Western nations began supporting Ukraine. This has included damaging pipelines like the Nord Stream and targeting other key infrastructure. The challenges of investigating these attacks are significant. Often, it's hard to tell whether the damage is deliberate or accidental, especially with limited surveillance in the oceans. As Russia steps up its game, NATO's response has been to increase sea patrols and military presence, especially with the launch of Baltic Sentry. This operation involves a range of military assets, including frigates and surveillance planes, to monitor key areas and prevent further attacks. Finland's national security advisor, Janne Riinen, emphasized that failing to act could lead to more serious disruptions, especially since hybrid warfare tactics often fly under the radar, avoiding triggering NATO's mutual defense clause. The challenge for Europe is not just about direct military conflict, but also about protecting its critical infrastructure without escalating tensions. As Russian hybrid tactics continue to evolve, NATO's ability to respond effectively will be crucial. The growing concerns over Russia's increasing use of these tactics, including cyber attacks and acts of sabotage, show how vulnerable Europe's security systems have become. The big question now is, can Western countries defend against these low-cost, low-risk strategies without sparking direct military conflict? This remains to be seen as NATO's Baltic Sentry operation plays out and as the situation in the Arctic also grows more tense, with Russia expanding its military presence there as well. In conclusion, the threats to undersea cables and critical infrastructure are more than just isolated incidents. They're part of a broader strategy to destabilize the region. NATO and European nations are taking steps to protect these vital links, but the balance of power in the Baltic and beyond remains uncertain. Russia is expanding its military presence in the Arctic with hypersonic missiles and a massive icebreaker fleet, challenging NATO. The US faces issues like melting permafrost in Alaska, while Russia pushes to control new shipping routes, especially the Northern Sea route. NATO is ramping up surveillance and defense investments in response. In the Baltic Sea, NATO has launched Operation Baltic Sentry to protect critical infrastructure from sabotage, like undersea pipelines. NATO allies are working together, improving security and expanding defenses against Russia's growing influence and hybrid tactics. The US and EU are supporting these efforts with military aid and joint defense plans.